Well, welcome to the 2011 Literary Feast at Broward College. I'm here with Dr. Helena Yeaman, who's introducing her book, The House That Uncle Sam Built.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very happy to have you here. Now, I understand one of the chapters in your book originated as an article in the Political Science Quarterly.
That's right. It was called Bipartisan Roots of the Financial Crisis. And really what I was trying to do is trying to figure out what were the politics behind all these policies that allowed everybody and their mother to be a homeowner and actually encouraged it, and what led to the crisis itself. So, you know.
And how did that spark maybe lead into the development of the entire book?
Well, that particular chapter looked at sort of everything from the Community Reinvestment Act through the 1999 Financial Services Modernization Act, and how both Democrats and Republicans contributed to the crisis with some of their policies. I wanted to go back further than 1977, though. I wanted to go back to the beginning of the 1900s and see what kind of policies led to the government encouraging home ownership. How did the American desire for a home work itself into a situation where the government was actually creating a currency that you could only use to purchase a home? And so I went back to that, and I also went forward from the crisis. Yeah.
And what did you discover as you looked at what happened since the recent financial crisis?
Well, I think what we've seen is that whereas before we either had inappropriate regulation or lack of regulation, now we have over-regulation, which is probably going to cause some pain to both the banks, obviously, and to consumers, because the prices for bank services are going to go up. On the other hand, I think that there have been important international ramifications. I think that the crisis is going to lead to an increased role for China, India, and some other countries in the IMF. It's already happening, and there's a chapter on that in the book as well. And I also take a theoretical look backward at the theories of Adam Smith and Friedrich Hayek and how they would perceive our housing sector, how our housing sector was created and maintained, different government policies like the creation of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, how this led to a sort of distortion in favor of home ownership in our economy.
Okay. I'm very intrigued by the cover of your book. How did this design come about?
Yeah, this cover actually, it was my idea, but I can't draw for anything. And I found a very talented young woman, Jordan Centerins, who was one of my students. And at the time she wasn't, now she is. And I asked her to design this cover with Uncle Sam sort of hammering on a false front with homeowners in the shadow. Yeah. And of course the little fat cat real estate agent is handing them the nails to hammer in the false front. So the idea was, this business interest in the government really created this homeownership sector, and the forces of supply and demand were not really allowed to operate freely in that sector.
Yeah. So it's kind of visualizing the illusion of that part of the American dream.
Right, which has really turned into an American nightmare for many of us. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So the book can be bought on Amazon.com. It can also be purchased at Lulu.com, and I will be giving $1 of the proceeds to Compassion International for people who don't have a home. So if you want to buy it, my name's Helena Yeaman, and here's my book, The House That Uncle Sam Built.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, this is clearly a very timely project. And I was wondering, with this in mind, what other kind of projects do you have in the works, writing or otherwise?
Right now, I'm sort of in hiatus mode. I've decided I have a PhD in political economy from Georgetown, and I have a master's degree in education from FIU and another master's degree from Georgetown. But I was thinking that I would like another master's degree, this time in purely economics. So I've started to pursue that. I imagine that there will be some publishable articles and items that come out of that process. But right now I'm not really too sure what's next.
Absolutely. And I was wondering, how do you bring what you learned from this particular book into the classroom as an educator?
Well, when we talk because I teach both macro and microeconomics here, and I teach national government, whenever we talk about government ownership and the government and the public sector, we talk about how in the past the government only owned a couple of things: Amtrak, the TVA, and the post office, and now all of a sudden we're owning these big entities, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. What do? They securitize loans, or they purchase loans from banks. Why is that important? So we work that into the discussion, and then into a full-blown discussion of the financial crisis and the housing sector crisis.
Well, it sounds exciting.
It's fun.
Yeah, I imagine it is.
And I guess it's fun. I'm sorry it happened, but
Right.
it's interesting academically.
And everyone has a stake in this.
Yeah, very true. Everyone does. We all do. Even if your home is paid for, we've seen home values come down so far, and nobody likes to see that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for meeting with us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Hello, we're here with author Greg Brickman, who is an employee here at Broward College. She works in the Department of Nursing. And you're promoting your book, Illegally Dead. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your novel.
I am. Illegally Dead is, there's Illegally Dead. It's about a malpractice attorneys who are recruiting clients inappropriately from a hospital, and somebody gets really ticked off and decides to kill them, which he does very graphically and repeatedly. And Tony Conti, my protagonist, is the male nurse manager of the emergency department, and he gets all involved in catching the killer and solving the crime. Are you going to ask me?
Oh, yes, please. What led you to creating this main character? What's he like?
Well, he's really sexy. Illegally Dead is it's actually about killing malpractice attorneys. They've gotten out of line. They've ticked off one person really bad, and he proceeds to murder a lot of them very graphically. And Tony Conti, my protagonist, takes it upon himself. He's moved to help solve the crime. He's got an ex-special forces background. And he got out, he was a medic in the service, he got out, he went to nursing school, he wanted to give back, all those traditional kind of motives we see in our male nursing students. And so he's done very well, but he kept all that skills, he kept the edge. And I've also been told by my readers that he's incredibly sexy, that they certainly wouldn't like kick his shoes out from under their bed or anything.
Well, it sounds fascinating. What led to the creation of this character, Tony Conti?
The motivation for putting it as a male nurse in the emergency room was really wanting to have a male nurse in that setting be very credible. And that vehicle gave me a chance to do that, as well as to develop a character that was caring and very strong and very macho at the same time.
It would seem, considering your own background in nursing, that might have influenced the development of the story.
It has to, because it's about hospitals, and you have to have like the inside track, and it's about medicine, and it's about nursing. I don't think you could write it if you're not involved somewhere.
And how is maybe South Florida a kind of character in this work?
South Florida is a very, very favorite setting for novels.
Yes.
There's a lot of things happen here. We have some incredible people, lots of cultures, all sorts of things that you can roll into the background and that you can use to create the mood of the book. And I've lived in South Florida for 40 years, and I don't know anything else. Nobody wants to read about North Dakota.
No. Well, it sounds like you're an expert on the material, so it works.
Thank you.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to other writers who are perhaps just starting to sculpt their craft?
Now it's to go the traditional publishing route first. I think, particularly for young people, for those of us who have tried that, we need to find out about the other options that are available. You need a good critique group. Once you venture out, this is self-pub. It's
Right.
through Amazon, CreateSpace. Once you venture out on your own, you need to make sure you're working with people who can critique your work, who are honest, who will tell you what they think of it, because otherwise you don't stand a chance. I've read a lot of self-pub stuff that's incredibly badly edited. And so you need to do it yourself or get people to help you.
Well, That's very useful advice. Thank you so much for meeting with us today.
Thank you very much.
Hello, we're here with Greg Lindeblum, who's an economics professor here at Broward College, and he's here to tell us a little bit about his collection of images, his collection of photographs called Stopping Time. And it's kind of a fascinating title. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what led you to that one.
Well, I've been a photographer now since I was a little boy. I'm one of those people whose father gave them a camera when they were just a very young boy. I've been doing photography ever since, and I got serious about it 20 years ago. I've been exhibiting now for 20 years all around the country. And one of the things that people say about photographers is that we have the ability to stop time. And I took that as the theme for the book I've just published. It's called Stopping Time, and it's a series, it's an eclectic collection. It's a series of images that represent stopping time. For instance, people walking in the Moscow metro. So you'll see blurred images of people walking in front of subway trains, or of subway trains that are going very quickly. The themes range from Lower Manhattan, where I lived for 12 years, which I call Mythic Manhattan series, to the Moscow metro, to a variety of different themes and concepts that I've been working with over the years.
How would you describe your process of selecting images?
That's actually quite difficult because this is an eclectic collection. Normally I have a very structured thematic approach to what I'm going to be doing. This was quite different for me, and it was actually quite an interesting experience. This one came from my gut. That's no other way to describe it. These are things that have resonance with me. And that's how I did it, because I was having difficulties trying to figure out what the book would involve, because I've done books on architectural books, I've done other books, but this was the first one I've done that was an eclectic collection.
Right. And do you prefer digital or film photography?
Well, I'm of the age where I learned film photography. I spent a great deal of time in the darkroom. I love the darkroom. But I converted over to digital in 2002. I love the absolute control I have over the process from beginning to end. And I've really adapted fully. I still have my film cameras around, but they don't get much use.
Do you think that digital photography will eventually just altogether replace film?
I hope not, because there's nothing like a gelatin silver print. So I hope it never that film never goes away. But for the most part, digital will become the medium of choice. Absolutely.
Now, do you consider your work as a photographer to be entirely separate from your work as a professor of economics, or do you find a way to marry the two sometimes?
No, this is definitely right brain, left brain. The artistic side and the right brain, my analytical economic side on the left. And I worked in finance and banking for 23 years before I came to Broward College. So this for me is my creative outlet. There's no relationship between what I do in the classroom and what I do in my photography.
Okay. It sounds fascinating. Where could we find your book, Stopping Time?
Stopping Time you can find on blurb.com, http www.blurb.com. You'll see my work hanging all around the county. I've shown in over 50 galleries and businesses here in Broward County over the past 10 years. So lots of opportunities to see my work.
Okay, excellent. Well, we look forward to seeing you at the Literary Feast. Thank you for speaking with me today.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay. Hello, we're here with Martin Green, Professor of Health and Wellness here at Broward College. And you're here to talk to us about your book, Dress to Impress. It's a men's fashion book, yes?
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about your approach to men's fashion in this book.
The approach is that men drastically need it, particularly college students, which is probably why I'm here discussing it with you.
Right.
It seems that fashion has deteriorated immensely in the last 40 to 50 years. Doesn't seem like it. It has, most definitely, especially in light of the fact that so many young men particularly like to wear their pants down just around the middle of their thighs. So they wear more underwear than they do seem to wear trousers.
Right.
And that's not the best look for a young man, particularly somebody who's in college who, in the foreseeable future, will either be interviewing for a job or to get into another school, or maybe a part-time job while in school. Men have absolutely no fashion sense by and large. And whatever sense they seem to have had, they seem to have lost. So what I've done is, in this book, I've addressed that issue of particularly college men who are going to be going either into the workforce or interviewing for some such thing, the graduate school, ongoing additional 4-year undergraduate schools, part-time work interviews, and teaching them how they should dress, not only to get a job, get into a school, whatever, but to make them understand that how you look, how you're attired, really makes the first and most indelible impression upon whoever it is that's interviewing you. So if you dress poorly, you're not getting the job in all probability. You don't stand a really good chance of getting into that school or whatever else you're interviewing for. So the way you dress speaks volumes as to who you are and what you're going to achieve.
So it's really not just about style for its own sake, but about life skills that are important to you.
More so than just style. I didn't write it just to have another book about style, high style.
Right.
The world doesn't need that. The world needs a consummate guide for people that they can follow that easily spells out exactly what they ought to do. And in the appendices in the back of the book, there are various areas where they can, each person who has it or a significant other can write down exactly what size of clothing they wear in every single nuance. For example, what their shirt collar size is. 92% of all men wear shirts that are at least one size too small for them in the collar.
Wow.
Oftentimes 2 and 3 sizes. It's unbelievable. The lack of knowledge with respect to men's grooming is beyond belief. Women tend to be much more in tune with proper attire than men. Always have been, but men were much better at it up to about 40 years ago. So this is something that's sadly needed, and that's why I wrote it.
So you say that there was a shift over the past 40 years. What do you think? Why do you think that happened? What do you think is the
I
reason
think
for
the
shift?
culture in the late 1960s changed the entire complexion, no pun intended, of men's attitude towards self-expression, towards how they dress, towards how they present themselves. It became not only free love, but free everything else.
No rules.
So and that's correct. And then with the 70s decade, which was completely horrendous, and that invoked the entire era of polyester. It went down even further if that were possible. So synthetic Hakupu shirts and polyester Nehru suits just don't make it.
Right.
So we needed help, and they still need it. I mean, I see the way my students dress. It's pretty sad. So I actually incorporate this information into the course I teach. Of course, wellness incorporates a lot more than just being healthy physically. It includes mental disposition, how you feel about yourself. Nothing speaks more about how you feel about yourself than the way you dress yourself.
Excellent. And what are some examples of advice that you give in the book and in your classroom?
Dress conservative. You cannot dress too conservatively. You can dress too extreme. So if you're a conservative dresser, it can only help.
Yes.
If you're an extreme dresser, it can only hurt.
Yes.
Unless you're dressing for maybe a special part in a movie, which I don't think too many students are doing. That's probably the most important piece of information, if I had to be succinct into one piece. There are many, but for example, know what size you are in various parts of clothing. Not only don't men know what size shirt they should wear, if you ask the average man what their sleeve length is, they don't know. What width shoes they are, they don't know. They don't know what you would think would be common sense, simple things to understand. Don't have a clue. And most of the time, they don't even care. Pretty sad.
Well, it sounds like a very helpful collection of advice.
I think so.
Yeah.
Especially the appendices at the back of it.
Right.
And it's written with a strong tone of humor as well.
Okay, good.
In fact, I created my own vocabulary. For example, expressions like belly flop, which is when men have a pendulous abdomen hanging over their belt buckle.
Right.
Things like that. Death of a salesman, which is where men are wearing short sleeve shirts with ties. and sometimes even pocket protectors. Not a good thing. So it's actually very funny, but it's also very useful. Rather than just a text, it's a guide for people to follow, so they know exactly how to dress for all occasions. I mean, there are chapters there just on cruise wear if you take a cruise, or if you're going to a social event. What is considered chic in certain things? What is casual? What is dressy? What is business casual? People don't know what business casual is. They haven't got a clue. So
As often as we use the term business casual, it's not necessarily understood.
there are people who will receive an invitation to say black tie, and they don't even know that means a tuxedo.
Oh, wow.
Not unusual. So the knowledge base of fashion for men is essentially non-existent, especially on college campuses.
Okay.
So I'm doing my part to help it at Broward College.
Thank you. Where can people find your book?
Amazon.com.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you again for speaking with us today.
My pleasure.
It's nice meeting you. Hello, we're here with Dr. Patricia Widener, who is a professor in sociology at FAU, and she's promoting her book, Oil and Justice. I was wondering, what led you to this project?
This work, it came out in September, and it looks at how 4 different communities in Ecuador work to either resist, contest, or concede an oil pipeline project. And I had studied how a community in the Amazon area where oil is produced, how they resisted the project, but also how they negotiated to get greater electricity, greater paved roads, very basic needs that community wanted. Another community that I looked at were the very professional environmental organizations. They have a lot of international contacts, and they negotiated a multi-million-dollar environmental fund for environmental research, environmental protection or conservation. And then the third community that I looked at was an ecotourism community. It probably had the strongest resistance to the pipeline project, but what they gained was an influx of domestic tourists. Due to their resistance, due to their arrests, due to their tree-sitting activities, many domestic travelers in Ecuador discovered the town and started going there on weekends. It's not what you would expect out of an oil fight. And then the fourth community along this pipeline is on the Pacific coast. It's poorer than the other communities, it's more marginalized than the other communities. And like the first one in the Amazon, it also got simple concessions. It got employment, it got paved roads, it got more of basic social justice needs that you would expect out of an oil wealthy country to begin with. So that's what I had looked at, how these 4 different communities responded to this pipeline project, and how some of them established international networks to really carry their voice or their agenda. I don't want to say around the world, but they did carry it to Germany, and they carried it to the US, and they carried it to Canada. And that's how some of the communities were able to get either concessions or some of the things that they wanted. No one was able to move the pipeline. The pipeline was built in 2 years. Ecuador is an oil extractor and an oil exporter. None of that actually changed, despite all the multiple years of mobilizing against the oil industry and against various oil projects there.
Were you surprised by some of the findings that you came across during this project?
There were several. I thought some of the oil towns, the ones with 30-year histories, I thought they would have fought harder, but they kind of stopped after they got basic services that they should have had anyway. I was very much surprised that the tourism town became a greater tourism town. That it's something I called oil tourism, that oil monies will flood a place and actually increase and promote the arrival of tourists. You don't expect it. It wasn't a real disaster, it was the perception of a disaster, but it was enough to generate tourists going there. And I think I thought that there would be enough mobilization that they were going to stop the project. I thought indigenous communities and indigenous organizations were going to unify to stop the project, and they didn't. It wasn't a project that they really took on, so in some ways I was surprised by that.
And how do you bring what you learned from this project into the classroom?
It's about environmental justice and social justice and economic justice. So I have a class on poverty, and I talk about poverty and why poverty exists and who experiences it and how they experience it. And that was definitely communities in Ecuador are impoverished, and some would suggest perhaps due to a dependency on oil or the extraction and the export of oil. I also have a couple of classes on disasters and the environment. And so I can talk about environmental justice, right? The unequal burden of toxins or environmental conflicts. I bring this type of work out in most of my classes, I would say.
And what messages do you think you'd like to emphasize to any reader of this book? What messages in particular would you like readers to take away from this book?
Well, I guess the idea that there are injustices in the oil industry, from the side of production to transportation to consumption. And I know with the BP spill last year in 2010, we got a sense of both the economic, ecological, and social problems and disasters that arise as part of oil production.
And where could we find this book?
It's published by Rowman and Littlefield, and you can also get it on Amazon.com.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
Hello, we're here with Olyenka Tala. He's a counselor here at Broward College, and he's been kind enough to explain a little bit about his new book, The Post 9/11 Syndrome. I was wondering if you could describe the book for us.
My book, The Post 9/11 Syndrome, International Education in an Era of Homeland Insecurity, Perspectives from the Florida Frontline, was actually inspired by the September 11, 2001 attacks on the World Trade Center and other symbols of American diplomatic, military, and economic power. The whole idea of the book, I actually got it from looking at how that particular incident changed the trajectory of America in terms of the way that it welcomed international students to the United States, and the way it began to almost acquire a sort of siege mentality, where we felt that everything that is not American or that is different became something that we had to be very fearful of. So that was the whole idea, and it was actually a study that I conducted while pursuing my doctoral studies at Florida International University.
What methods did you use in your approach to this project?
It was basically a qualitative approach, although I also crunched some numbers in terms of looking at the trend in international student enrollment 5 years before the 9/11 attacks and 5 to 7 years after the 9/11 attacks. And I was looking at two universities in South Florida, in Miami really, the University of Miami, which is of course a private university, a research university, one of the most respected universities in the United States, and also Florida International University, which I also looked at. So what I did was I interviewed professionals, international education professionals who had direct contact with international students, international admissions professionals, counselors or international student advisors, also administrators. For example, I interviewed the Vice Provost for International Affairs at the University of Miami. I interviewed the DSO, or the Principal Designated School Official at Florida International University. So all these people who have direct responsibility before 9/11 and after 9/11 for the recruitment and retention of international students, and also for encouraging American students to venture abroad so that they could expand their horizon. I interviewed all these people, and based on a protocol that I developed in collaboration with my dissertation committee, and based on those interviews and what the literature said about internationalization, about multiculturalism, about the very idea of trying to overcome the kind of unintended event or unanticipated event that 9/11, the 9/11 attacks was. Based on that, I was able to, come up with some findings on how the 9/11 attacks has impacted international education in the United States.
And what is the 9/11 syndrome in your view?
The 9/11 syndrome, at the end of the day, I dissected it into what I called 3 menaces, 3 contradictions, 3 trajectories, and 1 dominance. There was a menace of fear, that ensued from the phobia that attended anything that was not indigenous to the United States on American campuses, and the introduction of what we call SEVIS, which was the Student Exchange and Visitors Information System, which tried to basically control the inflow of international students to the United States by reporting on their every move and making sure that they were confined to certain boundaries, which actually resulted in a situation where within a period of 5 years, the 5 years after 9/11, there was a decline in the number of international students that came to the United States and that came to those 2 institutions. There was a perceptible decline. We also noticed that study abroad also was not something that people really wanted to venture into because of this fear of the unknown. We also talked about dominance of technology, which came out from the SEVIS, because then everything was being controlled. You had to report when a student came to your campus. You had to report to the authorities. You had to report whether they were in school full-time or they were part-time. There was also the trajectory of contradictions. Now, international education professionals are supposed to be advocates for students. They are supposed to make sure that they are very comfortable within the U.S. setting and that they were successful. But then with the regime of SEVIS, which came after the 9/11 attacks, they also became sort of police officers on campus.
Yeah.
So they were on the one hand, they were supposed to be advocates for the students. On the other hand, they had to be the ones monitoring them and making sure that they stayed within certain boundaries. So they were really conflicted. The people that I spoke with, they were really conflicted. They didn't know exactly where they belonged. The students did not trust them. The government did not think they were doing enough. So it was really a catch-22 for a lot of the professionals that I spoke with in those 2 institutions. So it was a very lengthy study, and I probably cannot touch everything right here. But what I want to say was that is that basically it introduced a new dimension into the United States psyche in terms of us being so fearful, being so fearful of something that we are not very familiar with. So that was the only concept.
And how do you bring what you learned from this project into your work with students?
Basically, I've been working with students for quite a while now, and I actually started at Broward College as an international admissions coordinator. So what I discovered with 9/11 was the stereotyping of people from certain parts of the world. This idea that if you are a potential terrorist, I call it the potential terrorist narrative that crept into American national discourse after the 9/11 attacks. Instead of thinking of people as potential terrorists or people who probably are going to be inimical to the security of the United States, I think we should not look at international education in that light. We should look at international education and national security as complementary concepts, not opposing concepts. They don't necessarily have to be opposed to each other. They don't necessarily have to. International education could actually further the cause of United States national security. And in my work with students, I always make it very clear that I'm looking at the content of their character, I'm looking at who they are and what they bring to the table. I'm not looking at what their religion is, what their cultural background is. I'm not looking at their geography. I'm just looking at what they bring to the table as people who share a common humanity, with whether you're talking about Americans or Russians or whatever. We all share a common humanity, and it's very important for us to bring that perspective to the table when we are talking about how to organize campus, social, psychological, and physical space.
Excellent. Sounds like an important work. Now, where can we find your book?
It's actually available on Barnes & Nobles. It's available also on Amazon. It was published by Ex Libris, so it's available on Ex Libris. So it's available, it's widely available, and it's also on Nook. So you can also read it electronically. It's on Nook, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for meeting with us, Dr. Talla.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
My
Really
pleasure.
appreciate it. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you. Hello, we're here with Dr. Williams Sr. He's our Dean of English here at Broward College. And you've written Stephen R. Donaldson's Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, Variations on the Fantasy Literature?
Yes.
Fantasy genre?
It's a scholarly study.
Excellent. What drew you to this particular series?
Well, I think the title tells you it's variations on the tradition. He does such radically different things with the sort of standards, if you will, of epic, fantasy, what have you in terms of that genre. And it's a hard book, or they are hard books. They're dense. The writing, he's a big fan of opera. And so he's aiming for a sort of operatic crescendo in a lot of things. So the language is even over the top at times. He's trying to get the operatic language. The characters are radically different. It's not the sort of standard that you would find. There are no dwarves or witches or elves or anything like that. And they're savagely violent at times. He doesn't pull punches like a lot of fantasy writers who are writing about all these giant battles and nothing really seems to get destroyed. It's
Right.
all at a distance, not in his books. And in fact, he's had such an effect that there's a guy named Steve Erickson, whose real name is Steve London. He's an archaeologist by trade, has written a series of books that are radically different from anything else, but he kind of got some of his ideas from reading Donaldson and what Donaldson did that's different. So it's like it's biblical. Somebody begat, and begat.
So he actually maybe incorporated some realism into this otherwise fantastical sort of work.
Well, the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant are your standard portal fantasy. You have a character from our world who gets moved to the other world, which is in many ways a parallel of our world. And when you read the fantasy part of it, what you're really reading is a symbolic commentary on our world. For instance, the hero is a leper, and he renounces power because lepers cannot practice power because it will destroy them. And Donaldson actually got that because his father was a medical doctor and he grew up in India. And his father worked with lepers and he knows how they live their lives and what they do. And this gave him this whole view into a sort of different way of looking at character and looking at literature. I asked him where he gets some of the terms from, and he said, well, they're Indian terms that most Americans would never hear. So it's, as I said, it's a radically different vision and fairly savage at times.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, in our literature classes, we often encourage our students not only read literature, but to compose their own literary criticism. So I was wondering how, based on your own experience in literary criticism, how you bring that and you encourage your students to do their own work.
Well, I think what I try and do is ask them to look for patterns and then work the patterns out. And you can do something very simple like in a Poe short story. You can go through all the patterns of looking, everything in Poe is based on claustrophobia basically. And so you can start looking for those patterns and how he uses them in the Gothic. And then you can take them back and say, well, why do you think Poe wrote the stuff that he wrote? What have you been taught? And of course they all say he was a deranged, alcoholic madman. And you say, no, he stole it all, just like all of them do. And then what he did was he wrote the stories the way he wanted them to be told. But you can go back to almost all of Poe's short stories and find something that he took it from.
Yes.
And so if you take something like the Cask of Amontillado, which has the typical Jekyll and Hyde pairing, the duality, and everywhere they go, it gets narrower and
Yes.
narrower and narrower and further down. And so in that way, what you're doing is you're teaching them critical thinking, and critical thinking starts with looking for patterns, looking for the way things are related. Fortunato, Fortune, Montresor, Montresor, my treasure. All right, the characters have the same name. Now, in how many different ways are they similar or different, and why? What's Poe doing? So I think that's basically what it comes down to, and I try not to lecture them at all. I try to get them to read the passages and give me the information and the interpretation out of the passage.
Right.
But none of them know that Montresor means my treasure until I tell them. So there's a certain amount of that goes on.
Well, you're leading the discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out to speak with us today, and I'll see you at the festival.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, we're here with Dr. Barbara Nightingale. She's an English professor here at Broward College. And your latest book is Two Voices, One Past?
Correct.
So if you could tell us a little bit about the collection of poems.
It was a runner-up in the Yellow Jacket press contest, chapbook contest. So it's a little skinny book, and they liked the book, so they published it, even though it didn't win first prize, but it did place. So it's a collection of poems written in my mother's voice. And sometimes I have to explain that I wrote the poems, but I wrote them as if they were my mother speaking. So that's what a persona poem is. It's getting into the character and writing as though I were she. So most of the book is in her voice, and then there's, I think, 4 poems at the end that are about her in my own voice.
How would you describe your approach to the process of writing poetry? What's your schedule?
I write late at night, between midnight and 6 a.m. And when the house is quiet and it's dark and I put on my music, and I notice that my poetry varies according to what music I'm listening to, if I'm burning incense, what kind of incense. Different olfactory and auditory influences show up in my poetry all the time. I haven't been writing a lot lately, though. I'm just really tired.
Well, that's understandable. I mean, what writing do you think has maybe influenced your own work the most?
Actually, well, poetry, of course, all poets. I just love poetry, and I read a lot of poetry. I read a lot of contemporary poetry lately, and it changes constantly. I mean, all my favorites are, the great poets, from Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton, on up to, I even love Billy Collins and Sharon Olds, contemporary poets. But Matthew Dickman is a new poet that I just discovered this summer, very young. I just fell in love with his work as well, and so all kinds of poetry, but also novels. I read a lot of fiction, and the language of words just feeds in and inspires me.
And I was also wondering, how is your approach to writing similar to your philosophy of teaching?
Words. Words are things that I taste. I roll them around in my mouth, and I like to hear poetry out loud. I like to read out loud. So when I teach writing of any kind, even if it's English 1101, I tell all my students to read their essays out loud to themselves, even if they have to go into a closet to do it. Read them out loud, because you'll hear how they sound. You'll hear your tongue trip over awkward phrases, and if the words don't taste good in your mouth, they're not going to sound good on the page. So very much the auditory plays into all kinds of writing.
Absolutely. That sounds incredible. Where can we find your book?
The libraries have my book. I don't know if it's Central Campus. They have some. And Amazon.com. All of the books are available on Amazon. And I believe the South Campus Bookstore has several of my books.
Okay, so much for speaking with us today, Dr. Knight.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And the festival.
Bye.